Hi there, and welcome to Unfiltered Solopreneur, the podcast where we share real, unvarnished stories of people who dared to break free from the corporate grind. I'm your host, Nikhil, and I'm passionate about helping solopreneurs like you turn their dreams into reality. What do you do when you're in charge of layoffs and realize you need to lay yourself off? That's where Hannah Baker's story begins. A tech executive with a solid retirement plan, she suddenly found herself jobless and unmoored. Instead of racing to the next role, she did something radical. She paused. In this episode, we explore how a $400 Etsy side hustle became a lifeline, how creativity turned into strategy, and why slow, intentional solopreneurship might be the antidote to burnout. If you've been hustling on autopilot but craving calm, this conversation might give you permission to choose differently. I'll see you on the other side with my takeaways. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Unfiltered Solopreneur. I'm your host, Nikhil Vaish, founder and CEO of Boost Solo. My next guest is a former educator and tech operations executive who stepped off the corporate ladder to stitch her way to calm, now helping others reconnect with presence, purpose, and a little peace, one cross stitch at a time. Hannah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you, and I'm excited for our conversations because you've had a few twists and turns in your career, right?
Yes, definitely. Not linear at all.
which is fun for our audience. So now you mentioned executing multiple rounds of layoff before eventually including yourself in one. So could you talk a little bit about what that moment sort of revealed in terms of where you were emotionally and professionally?
Yeah, so that was a big eye opener for me as I was, I didn't know it yet, but I was getting ready to transition out of that corporate world for the time being. And the company that I was working at, was hit really hard by the pandemic and then all the changes to higher education that were kind of happening in response to that. And, over time, we were finding ways to, stay profitable and stay healthy, but that did involve downsizing and kind of changing structures multiple times. And so as an operations executive, I was working through the strategy and the execution and thinking about, what the organization needed to look like. And I hadn't considered my role very deeply, in all those rounds kind of leading up. I just said, okay, what do I need to do here? What's my big view of the company? And kind of thinking about every piece but myself. And then when the company did get to a certain size, it started to become a thought process and a conversation of, well, what is my role and what is my future here as we do get down to a certain size. So ultimately, that was, a conversation with the CEO to say, hey, maybe what needs to happen is for me to do this last job well. I need to be included in it. And so with that realization, that was so huge to me. I'd kind of had this plan in my mind of, well, I'm going to do this for 10, 15 years, whether at that company or another company, but I'm going to do, high paying operations exec work, do it for 10 or 15 years and retire early. And then, I can do what I want because that was my big goal, was spend every day in the way of my choosing. So I thought, well, I'll do that later. Right now, I'll work really, really hard to get that kind of early retirement. And so then when I realized, oh, I'm not going to be in this role anymore and I don't have anything else lined up and it's not a great job market, that future that I thought for myself is not a given. That was such an eye-opening moment that I just needed to stop for a while. So, I followed through with that layoff, which included transitioning myself out of the company, and I just stopped everything for a little bit to just kind of decompress and realize, okay, there might be other futures out there than this one that I've been thinking of that is no longer on the table at the moment. And how can I think about the options that are open to me? And so my first instinct was, okay, I'm going to apply for jobs again. I'm just going to, kind of get back in there and, see what my connections might have for me and see if I can get my next thing. But I had been working on kind of a creative side project, which was just starting, a small Etsy shop selling cross-stitch designs. And that was a lot of fun, but it was really tiny. I never thought, oh, I could make something real out of this. But as I was working with a career coach to kind of figure out my next steps, she really encouraged me to think about this idea of, spend 10 or 15 years in these high paid corporate roles and then get out so that I can do what I want every day. So, well, think about it. Could you be doing what you want now?
Now, right,
um, and so that was really something to think about was, okay, maybe I don't have to be, totally financially free and set and not need to worry about money at all to do what I want. Maybe I can be doing what I want and still be working to make a living and working to build a business. And those things can coexist. Maybe it didn't
right.
have to be one and then the other.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. And I think it's like once we're on that hamster wheel, I went through this too. You just assume that that's kind of the wheel you have to be on
Yeah.
until you reach some made up point you have in your mind that I'll have X amount of, in my bank account and this many years and I would have achieved this, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll go do it. But clearly the seed was there, right? Because you always had the plan of sort of doing something outside of, early retirement, but also sort of doing the things you love, I think you said, right?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I wanted to do the things I love. And I thought, well, maybe that will bring me money. Maybe it won't, but it won't matter if it does, right? It won't be a requirement, and therefore I can enjoy it. But that was not necessarily, a true thought that it had to be, no financial pressure for me to still enjoy it, because I'm finding now, I guess I'm about a year and a half in of, working independently and running my own business, fully dedicated to that. And I'm finding that I can quite enjoy it. It doesn't mean it's stress-free all the time, but I
Yeah.
can enjoy it quite a lot. And I am able to spend my days in the way of my choosing to a, very large degree.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing to me is a lot of people have also told me that it was almost like they had either a mentor or a coach or
Mhm.
somebody who sort of helped make a little bit of that adjustment, right? Just almost like, I think of it as a soccer ball that gets sort of deflected and goes into the goal, right? So you're still scoring the goal, you get credit with it, but it's just a little bit of a deflection, right? That happens. So that was,
Yeah,
yeah,
just someone to let you know, other things are possible. It is okay to change your mind. You can do something different than you thought of for yourself or that you think anybody else expects for you.
right. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's just also sort of having, somebody sort of repeat what you were already planning to do to know that to take that final leap, I should say, right? That
Mhm.
sometimes we all need to take. So the other thing that you mentioned to me was that you had started your Etsy shop as a creative outlet while you were still at your tech operations job, right?
Yep.
Now, in the first year, you made less than $400. You told me, right?
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about what motivated you. What motivated you to persist despite that lack of sort of immediate financial return, right? A lot of people would have been like, "Whoa, wait a minute, can I really turn this into something?"
Yeah, yeah, I look back and think, "Oh my gosh, what was I thinking just leaping in with, that number as my baseline?" But what really kind of gave me that thought of maybe there's something here is that in that time when I said I just had to kind of stop after I left my last role, and I thought, okay, I'm just gonna like be quiet in my body and in my space and in my mind. And that was around the holiday time. And for crafts businesses, holidays are really, really great time. You tend to get a surge around then, whether it's for gifting or because people, it's dark and it's cold and people are wanting kind of cozy crafts and to be inside. So it's a nice time for crafts businesses anyway. But I had really stepped back. I wasn't working. I wasn't releasing new patterns or really advertising or, very active on my social media. Did a little traveling with my family and even being more hands off. I saw this nice little surge over the holidays. And so I thought, oh, if I can get this bump doing nothing, imagine what I might be able to get if I did everything, because
Right.
I've been doing little bits here and there, kind of after hours, for that year or so when I was just having it as a side hustle. And so I think that was what gave me that, kind of thought that maybe it could work, maybe I could do more, was that even stepping completely back, I got this nice little holiday surge, and that just felt like, I could really then make a nice trajectory there if I put my effort into it. So I just gave myself, I didn't set an exact timeline, but I thought, well, at least for a few months, let me focus on this and see how it feels. And if I don't like it, or I'm too scared, or I'm just, not seeing any signals, then I can always, back away and focus on a job search again. But after a few months, that trend was continuing nicely, and I was really enjoying, developing new products and doing a lot of, market research and figuring out the demand and, where else could I kind of apply myself. So that, okay, I want to continue. I'm feeling excited and inspired. And so that was kind of to spring. And then I gave myself the next kind of milestone was at the end of the year. I just wanted to see signs that it felt like this was continuing to be worth pursuing. The combination of, my savings plus any revenue was like good enough for me
Yeah.
to feel stable enough for my family. And so that was the next milestone, was the end of that year. Okay, am I just feeling those signs that it's still on the right track and it's worth pursuing? And then that leads me to here, this, late spring, early summer.
Yeah, and I think there's something magical about the earning that dollar. It's not the amount, but outside of the corporate world, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's something that propels you on. Even in my first year of, the first 6 months of Boost Solo, it must have been like $500, but it was like, wow, I went and, created something
I
on
did
my
something that
own.
somebody
Yeah.
wanted.
And
Yeah.
somebody paid money for it, right? So it's, yeah, there's
Yeah.
something magical about that, just psychologically, I think.
Yeah. And a big boost for me too, last year was that I started to research, what types of grants and, kind of non-dilutive funding opportunities were out there. And something that I didn't really know, something that I'd kind of had a misperception of grants as being all, government funded and all for nonprofits, and not for businesses like mine. And I discovered, oh my gosh, there are so many, corporate sponsored and, various grants for small businesses, for-profit businesses. Um, and so I did get a couple of grants through the year, small amounts, $5,000, $1,000. But it was enough to, again, make me feel that, oh, somebody believes in this, right? Not only do some people want to pay me for what I do, some people want to give me money to do more of it. They believe in my vision. And so that was a big motivator too, even though the amounts weren't huge, that made me feel like, okay, I've got something here that I should keep pursuing.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. It gets lost in our social media world of this veneer of the hockey stick success, right? Every business is built brick by brick, slowly, little by little, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
sort of, you move two steps forward, one step back in terms of revenue. That's just the way it is. But I
Yep.
don't think enough people talk about that, because I don't know any business that's been built any other way. There may be
Right.
one in a century that sort of goes crazy right out of the box. But other than that, pretty much everything you look at. And but what people share on social media is, of course, just the tail end of what they want to show you, right? Not the 6, 8, 10 years that it took to build that business. So,
Yeah. And something, I don't know if it's just, my network and what the algorithms are serving to me, but for me, even when I'm kind of in the world of entrepreneurship on social media, so much of it is centered on startups, not small businesses.
right.
And I've really been actively trying to build my network of small business owners, because it is a different world. You have completely different goals, completely different operating systems. And yeah, the numbers and the trajectories, I mean, they're so different. And so, for me, I didn't really even know when I started, I was like, am I a founder? Is this a startup? What am I doing? And I realized, sure, maybe I'm a founder. That's debatable. I'm definitely a business owner. I'm definitely a small business owner. What I'm building is a small business. I'm not in it to exit. I'm not looking for exponential growth. I'm looking for something that fulfills me, that supports my family, that can, really give me a lot of opportunities for learning and growth. But it's not a startup, and I'm not aiming for that. And it's not startup results. And I'm not looking for funding like a startup
Yeah.
either, or building a team like that. And that's most of the conversations that I see, on LinkedIn or in other spaces. I've got a lot of that kind of startup energy around me, and that's great. But it's not what I'm doing. And I know there's others out there like me, it's just a very different way of operating. And sometimes if you're not seeing that, you can feel like, oh, it's not, the real deal, but it is.
It is, and I honestly I couldn't have written a better plug for Boost Solo, because that's really what I'm trying to build here, right? Because I felt the same thing. I was like, I always say that, the difference between a solopreneur and the traditional entrepreneur. You described it well. We're not looking for world domination to become unicorns and
Hmm.
have like $500 million Series A rounds or whatever. I
Yep.
think the way I always talk about it is we're building the business around our life, not the other way around, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the fundamental difference between the traditional entrepreneur. It's still very entrepreneurial what we do. I
Yeah.
think it takes more courage sometimes, because we're doing it without any safety net, right?
Right.
Without the mentors, without the VCs, without the capital.
Hmm.
And but still, it's a very different path. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that is a fundamental point of difference. And you're right, there aren't a lot of communities, there aren't a lot of books, there isn't a lot of literature or resources to go to for the solo business owner path, right?
Yeah, I've found myself, I can be a little hesitant to, to start conversations with people and reach out. It can take me a while to get comfortable, but just in my local community, as I go to events sponsored by the library, or, I'm out at markets, I just find myself actually seeking out, these different, vendors or facilitators or workshop providers and small business owners that I see. I do find myself going over and saying, please talk to me, because they're the people that I can actually see in my community out there doing the thing. And so I have been just talking a lot more, getting offline, talking a lot more with people who are just in my area, who I see visually. You're doing what I want to do. Can I talk to you?
Yeah, and I think that community, it's like I always say, find your tribe, right? It's really
Hmm.
important to do that, especially on this journey. So let me ask you now, though, what did you think this solopreneurship, this small business journey would be like, and what has the reality been like? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Hmm. Um, so I think that for a long time, I always said, oh, I would never want to have my own business. I always want to be an employee. I would never want all that responsibility. I thought that you had to, go to business school and you had to just do kind of purely administrative tasks, and you were just kind of doing the high stress, high responsibility, kind of low interest level work. That's what I envisioned. Was that you're just a boss somewhere if you're going to own your own business. You're kind of taking on all the risk and not getting any of the like joy or benefits. I don't know why I had that idea in my head, but I always just thought, okay, I don't want that, right? I just want to be a good employee and get my paycheck and then go have fun with whatever things I enjoy. Um, but now I've discovered, as I've gotten into that, it's, the most interesting thing you could possibly do, because you do have to do everything. And if you're someone who loves to learn, which I definitely am, you know, if I stayed an employee, I might not ever get to learn a lot of the things that I'm learning now, around marketing and around, finance and accounting and around product development and design. I probably wouldn't ever get there. Or if I did, I'd have to work really hard to engineer that career and kind of get those roles and learning. But this, maybe I'm not learning in an environment where I have a lot of those coworkers around me to learn from, or those mentors, but there's plenty of resources. And to do that solo learning and say, okay, I'm going to really lean into marketing here, and I've never done that before. Or I am going to, learn these principles of product design, or, even just building a brand, so many learnings there. I've gone through a rebrand recently, and wow, second time through, I feel like I did that so much better than the first time. And at the same time, I know in a year or 2 years, I'll look back and think, oh my God, that was so awful. But now where I am is great. You always kind of look back at what you did before that you were proud of at the time. And you think, ooh, that was, not my best, but that just means you're always learning.
Yeah, and you are getting better, right? That's the thing about looking back and seeing that difference, to me, is that means you did actually learn and you did actually
Definitely.
progress. So I think there's a, if you didn't see any difference, then I think that might be a bigger problem, right? But you're right, you
Yeah.
have to wear many hats. The key is not to go down rabbit holes, right? Because I love learning too, but I got to
Mhm.
make sure I don't spend too much time like on the editing tools on the video thing, right? Because you could suck up a whole day trying to
Yeah.
edit a
And it
video
can
and
be
make it.
hard. You're doing
Yeah.
so many things. It can be hard to, keep track of what you're doing, to know, am I spending my time in the right places or not? I know that I'm learning things. I know I'm doing stuff, but am I doing the right things in the right proportion? So for me, I'm not a big proponent of time tracking. I think it can turn into a task itself and kind of be a time suck and be a distraction, or you focus too much on like fine tuning how you're spending your time. But I did, as I went from like, kind of very structured corporate environment to, okay, freedom, I'm going to run my own business. I can, do things the way I want. And I thought, okay, I do need a little check on what am I doing and is it the right things? And so for just about a month and a half, maybe 2 months, I did track my time, how much I was spending on which tasks. And then I put those tasks into buckets of grow, refine, maintain. Um, and yeah, I didn't put, hard kind of targets on how much I want to spend on each of those things. I just wanted to get a baseline of, am I spreading my time across those parts of my business that feel important? And I especially wanted to make sure I wasn't getting too much time in the refine bucket. That was kind of my suspicion because, I think that's what those rabbit holes sometimes are
Yeah.
too. You want to kind of get something perfect and you find something interesting and you want to just keep, getting it just right, maybe before you ship it. So I wanted to make sure I wasn't spending too much time in that refine bucket, doing lots of time in the growth bucket, and also not neglecting some of those maintenance tasks, right? Make sure that I'm keeping that foundation. So just doing that time tracking for that month or month and a half, I actually didn't find anything that I thought, oh, I'm like way off there. I thought, okay, I'm actually pretty happy with how I'm spending my time. And so it just gave me that confidence to kind of continue on the path I was going on. I was getting a pretty good mix of those elements.
Yeah.
And then also it just gave me kind of a actual infrastructure like in Google Sheets. If I did feel like I needed to return to it, I had kind of a nice setup for my tracking that I could always return to if I feel like I need that gut check again.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love the simplicity of it, right? Because I know people get lost in complicated software and like you said, they end up spending more time tracking their time than actually doing the tasks. And also, I think that's part of the learning curve is, right? Even I sort of did an audit earlier this year and I was like, am I really spending the amount of time I need to spend on revenue generating activities or growth, as you call them? Because you can end up doing a lot of busy work and feeling like, wait a minute, the business is not growing. It's not moving forward. I'm not getting more customers, but I'm working 24 hours a day. What's going on, right?
Yeah.
So I really like that system and the simplicity of how you've set it up. Um, so the other thing, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about branding, but you mentioned the rebrand, right? So you rebranded from Cubicle Cross Stitches to Room for Calm. So
Mm-hmm.
could you talk a little bit about what made you sort of feel like you'd outgrown the original identity and any challenges you faced in that transition?
Yeah, so it's definitely something that's still in progress. It's May now. I kind of launched the new brand in February, so
Oh,
it's
wow.
very
Okay.
recent still.
Yeah.
Cubicle Cross Stitches was the original name of my Etsy shop. And the reason I had started that shop, I think I was starting to feel a little bit of, burnout and just kind of that, suppression of those kind of most interesting and energetic parts of me while I was working in that corporate role. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to start this Etsy shop, and the theme is going to be, kind of funny cross stitch quotes that are inspired by these things that happen in the workplace that we can all relate to, but you wouldn't necessarily ever talk about or say. And so the kind of, slogan was your inner voice out loud. And it was really just aimed at this very niche audience of, crafty people who enjoyed, fiber arts and creative hobbies, who also worked 9 to 5s and kind of were feeling, this was really in the time of, post pandemic, or, in the pandemic and post pandemic, and, remote work and Zoom meetings. And there was all this stuff that just felt like really ripe for these relatable cross stitch patterns for a very niche audience.
Yeah.
And I found that audience, that was great. It was nice and small. That was fine for me because it was, just a side project and really a way for me to kind of have that creative outlet. So that was Cubicle Cross Stitches. It was never meant to be anything bigger. I didn't plan it for a future. I didn't think about, oh, could this ever grow beyond anything
Yeah.
else? And then when I did leave my last role and I thought, okay, I'm going to give this a go, well, I wanted to continue with what I had. And so I thought, first, I'm just going to work on the cross stitch pattern business and see if I put my time into it, what can I get out of that? And I did that, but then I did the math and I was like, okay, just patterns is not going to get me to where I need to be. It's a very low cost digital product. The numbers, the volume I would have to see to get the kind of revenue I needed. I was like, this is not,
Right.
not really the best way for me to make the money that I'm going to need to make eventually. So I thought, well, what else can I do with it? I thought, okay, it's already got kind of like a corporate bent. I did want to kind of stay tied to the corporate world. So I thought, okay, I can do, cross-stitch workshops for team building, or, leadership development, or, offsites. I thought this is like a great fit where I can make it work with my original name of Cubicle Cross Stitches, and I can bring the creative side, I can bring my corporate experience. And like, that's how I'll make my big money, is through these workshops, kind of high ticket events. And I talked with people through that idea, got some feedback. It seemed promising. But then when I went out there to actually sell the thing, I was like, oh my gosh, this is extremely hard, which some people that I talked to told me is going to be really hard. You have to be persistent. You have to give it time. You might not hear back from people for 6 months, or you hear back, but they say, oh, let's talk next year. That's when we're going to, it's like, okay, the timeline was really slow. I hated doing sales and outreach and spending all of my time managing that. It was not fun for me. I realized, oh, I'm not doing the creative work that I love. And like, maybe I would enjoy doing the workshops, but I'm not enjoying the work and the process to try and get there. I'm really getting away from everything that made me want to start this business and live this kind of life in the first place. So I felt like, okay, I know that this extremely niche cross-stitch business with this very particular theme is too small. I know now that I don't want to try and like make it work as a corporate workshop, brand and provider. What else can I do? And so I realized that, especially as I was talking with a lot of, HR leaders and, people in my network through this process, what I was actually always talking about, was not cross-stitch itself. It was about how creative hobbies really have the power to improve your overall health and wellness, physical and mental, and what a powerful tool it is that anyone can pick up. Cross stitch is very easy, but it could be anything. It could be coloring, it could be journaling, it could be doing a puzzle, really whatever it is, these kind of creative, hands-on, quiet hobbies that anyone can pick up for just a few minutes at a time, even if that's all you have. And especially in this day of just being on your devices all the time, how powerful that is.
Yeah.
And that's what I was talking about and what I was really excited about. And I was like, that's what I wish my brand and my company was. That's the conversations I want to be having. Not these kind of battles over, yes, this is what cross stitch is. And yes, it's okay for men and women. And yes, it could be good for your whole company. I didn't want to be fighting that battle. I just wanted to help people access these hobbies that maybe they used to do and, put down because they felt like they didn't have time, or just, kind of lost the energy for it. Or maybe they never picked up because they thought, oh, I'm not artistic. That kind of stuff is not for me. I thought, I just want to help people do more of that.
Yeah. Right.
So I thought, okay, well, that's another way to grow. Instead of trying to make my cross stitch business bigger, I can make my business bigger than cross stitch, right? There's all these other outlets that, people might not be interested in cross stitch, but maybe they do want to color or journal. Those are the two areas that I went to. And so that's how, I came around to Room for Calm, which is all about simple creative hobbies to soothe stress and anxiety, really for anyone on any budget with any amount of time, but who wants to just shut down the devices and enjoy that quiet creative time and all the benefits that come from that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting also because, while everyone talks about sort of niching down, that's a good thing, but you also don't want to niche down too far
Yeah.
to the point where there's no room for growth, right? Like you said, you were constantly struggling to have an educational conversation and trying to sell the idea before you could even get to the product, right? So you've got sort of double the job when you niche down too far, I think.
Yeah.
But so what's interesting though with where you've gone now is you're not selling productivity, right? You're kind of doing the opposite. You're asking people to slow down and to reconnect with themselves, which feels kind of more of a subtle promise, especially in this world that we live in, where entrepreneurship and solopreneurship is all about hustle and productivity and optimization and getting more done. So how are you finding, has it been a struggle sort of getting that message across? How are you doing that right now?
Um, it is funny. It's a bit of a conundrum, and even for myself, as I'm like, okay, I should be hustling, and I'm like, oh yeah, I just want to like sit down and crochet, and spend time with my family, which I make time for those things too. Uh, but also with that rebranding and that decision, I did go back to my, roots in this business of just pure B2C and nothing with B2B. And I
Yeah.
think it is in the kind of corporate world where there is a lot of that, okay, hustle, grind, and we need to be productive. And, if we're going to do this, we need to know like, what are the results going to be, right? We need to see it in the numbers. Going back totally to B2C and just selling to the people who, I mean, I find people are just craving that so much. Yeah, help me feel a little better. People actually really want that, in their own private lives. And I realized, oh, the way I wanted to go, I don't want employers to be gatekeepers. I think I really want employers to think about the health and well-being of their employees. But for what I want to provide it directly to the people. And I've actually found that there's a real craving for that. And I do spend a lot of time on social media, on Instagram and Blue Sky in particular. And I see people all the time saying, hey, yeah, I'm looking for a new creative hobby, or I'm looking for something to, kind of do with my hands. I used to do things when I was young. What can I pick up? What are some recommendations? People are really looking for that type of thing right now.
Yeah, I can totally sense it too. I mean, I think people are reaching a point where it's like, even something simple as I still, if I'm interviewing somebody like for work, doing a discovery interview, I'll still write notes with my hand
My
because your
hand,
brain absorbs in a different way, right? You activate.
definitely.
I don't have enough of a science background to know, but I know when you work with your hands, there's also a greater sense of accomplishment. Even something simple as washing dishes rather than putting in the dishwasher, leaves you feeling joyful, obviously, if you have to do it every night, but once in a while, there's a sense of accomplishment, or so I don't know how to explain it, but I think you're really onto something, and I think we really
Definitely.
need it as a society today.
Yeah, and there is, lots of science that shows that, doing something with your hands like that, and especially for crafting, very repetitive motions, so like cross stitch or crochet or knitting, those repetitive motions, they do kind of set off all kinds of positive chemical processes in your brain and body, and it does slow your heart rate and it does reduce your blood pressure. And you do feel this great sense of, yeah, accomplishment and confidence, coming out of those things. And yeah, it doesn't matter too much what the actual activity is, but that physical, act of creating or doing something with your hands, it's just like kind of this chain reaction, and you get all these benefits out of it.
Yeah, there's a tangible result, right? Because you could doom
Mhm.
scroll for 8 hours and put your phone down, and you feel that you won't feel like you've accomplished something in the same way
Mhm.
as seeing that thing you just created with one of your, you know,
Yeah.
uh, crafting activities sitting there in front of
Mhm.
you, and even being able to share it. I think, I really think we need that more. So,
Yeah.
power to you. So, the other thing you just mentioned a few minutes ago is interesting because, that's something I'm struggling with too. Is like, as a solopreneur, you do, as you said, you have to do everything, right? Now, you enjoy the creative part. You talked about that, and you wanted to sort of get back to that. But how are you balancing that desire to sort of, connect with people, do the creativity, with the need for sales and selling products and services, because you also have to do that, right?
Yeah. So what I try and do, and I haven't mastered it yet, but I try and pay attention to when I'm most energized for which type of task, and do things at the right time of day. Because, as I mentioned, okay, social media, that's a major sales channel for me. And I do try and keep my time there, extremely tight and focused on what I'm doing, and not get into scrolling or anything like
Yeah.
that. Um, but there's that. There's just computer time, and then there's a kind of actual creative time. And um, I do try and pay attention to, yeah, when I can do which things the best, knowing that I have to do all of them. Because for me, there are definitely different times of day um, that I have a hard time. And even, I love the physical work, but, one of the kind of collections of products that I sell, it's like handmade wood items, and so I do a lot of sanding and woodworking and dyeing and finishing and all that stuff. And I like that work, but I find myself in the afternoons just like not being up for it, And
Right.
so like, okay, if I get up first thing in the morning and it's still kind of cool and the sun's not fully out yet, that's a time when I can really just kind of bust through that work, and I do feel very accomplished. And that's kind of the best time for that. Whereas afternoons, I actually am pretty good at being on my computer. I know for some, if they need to sit at the computer, they want to do it first thing in the morning. For me, I can actually focus up pretty well and do that type of work in the afternoon. I can get into spreadsheets, so I try and kind of order those things where I know I can get the most, bang for my buck in terms of my energy for a particular task.
Yeah, and that's another important thing, I think, is sort of getting a sense of when your productive hours are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is and everyone's circadian rhythm is a little different. I mean, I'm a morning person, but I learned something that that I now don't give away my time in the morning to
Right.
tasks that sort of just suck time where I'm because I'm highly productive then. And
Mm-hmm.
I also learned that interestingly, the best time to have like brainstorming or creative activities is late in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is because our brains are tired, which just seems counterintuitive, but that means our defenses are down. So we're more open
Interesting.
to ideating. And, I learned this from some Stanford neuroscientist, not something I figured out.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really interesting, right? And I think that's another
It
thing is
is.
sort of figuring out your peaks and valleys and then planning your work around that. I think that's a really great point too for solopreneurs to sort of have an understanding of. So
But like I said, it can be hard to put into practice, even knowing those things about myself. One thing that, really helps me start my day is every day as I walk my daughter to school in the morning. And that's like just a great way, it's 10-15 minutes each way. It's a good stretch, fresh air. And then for some reason, it does tend to be my inclination to sit down at the desk right after that, even though I know that that's actually some of my best time to do some of the more physical work. So even knowing that, I do my best, but it can be hard to put into practice.
yeah, but even if you get it, like you have to also forgive yourself, right? That's the thing. I mean, I have a daily list and I don't always get to it. So I have a carryover. That way I don't
Mhm.
stress about it. It's not like, oh my God, like, I didn't finish my 5 tasks for the day.
Right.
You have to, as long as, your productivity, like you said before, it's like you can't, I don't think you should over stress about any of those aspects, right? Have a plan and then get as close to you as you can to executing it every day. So,
Yep,
and you get better at it too, right? It's a muscle.
definitely.
We build those muscles as we go along.
Mhm.
Um, so the other thing you said to me was you mentioned here too. You started with you didn't start with the business plan. You just sort of had this experiment and you sort of went for it. So
Yep.
what have been some of the boldest or the hardest, I should say, lessons you've learned along the way in that first year?
Yeah. So I think probably the hardest lesson I learned was in trying to go out for this idea of B2B workshops and then pulling
Right.
back and realizing, okay, this is not for me at all. I went for that. As I said, I spoke to people, I got some feedback, but I was getting feedback from people who knew me and wanted me to succeed and wanted to support me. And, there was nothing on the line.
Yeah.
And so I thought, oh, well, so many people who are in relevant positions are telling me that this is really cool and interesting and different from what they've seen and a good idea. So it's probably going to sell great, but I definitely learned that when something is on the line, even some of those same people going back and saying, okay, well, what events do you have coming up that I can, support with? And here's where I can slot in. Suddenly it's like, you still think it's cool what you're doing, but right, it's not for us. Everyone says, well, it's not for me. And I really, you know, put a lot of stock in that idea mentally. I was like, okay, this is the way I'm going to do it. And I felt like I had those early signs and feedback that this is going to be something that will work. But when you are talking to people who know you and want to support you and want you to succeed, yeah, they're going to give you a positive sense. And that is like nice to have the encouragement. And there's no fault in that. But I think I would have needed much more um, kind of rigorous testing of the demand there and to
Yeah.
understand what that could really look like and not just kind of build it up as a good idea in my head. So after kind of spending a few months on that and then starting to really not enjoy it and then still in my mind saying, yes, this is what I'm pursuing, but actually shying away from those tasks every day. That was kind of a long learning process with no outcome other than it prompted me to go back to the drawing board and rebrand, which now I'm so happy with. But that was a pretty tough lesson to learn. Was like, just because your friends say it's a good idea doesn't mean it's actually going to be a sound business model and that you can execute on it.
Yeah, and you're right, they mean well, right? And this is a trap I've fallen into too. And now I always recommend to people to have two types of supporters. I call them angels and truth tellers. Because
Mm,
the angels are not investors. They're the people, like you said, who will always support you no matter what. And you need them on a bad day, right? Because they're your cheerleaders. They're 110% behind you. But then you need the truth tellers to
yeah,
really sort of give you the unvarnished point of view on
yeah,
an idea you bring. And it is a little painful, it hurts your ego a little bit, but it's the only way to grow your business,
yeah,
and really get out of that sort of the blind spots that we all have as humans, right? So
yeah.
yeah, I definitely recommend that. But that's an important but and sometimes you just learn the lesson by doing, right? Like you have to.
Yeah, I don't have any regrets. I was like,
No.
okay, yeah, lesson learned now.
Yeah. So the other thing you mentioned earlier also was that you received some grants and you participated in a boot camp, I think you told me.
Mhm.
So can you talk a little bit about how those opportunities came about and sort of what were the most valuable takeaways, or did they change your approach in any way, I should say?
Yeah. So, the first kind of tip I have and just thing that I learned is that there are several kind of communities or platforms that will aggregate all these different, grants and funding opportunities from all across the internet and put them in one place for you to browse through, which makes it a lot easier than searching for each thing individually, which was how I started out. So, Hello Alice does that. Galaxy of Stars, Skip or Hello Skip does that. So there's some great places to kind of just get everything in one and browse through opportunities and find out what could be a good fit for you and your business. Um, and then yes, I went through it's called the Creative Business Boost Camp. I saw that and I thought, ooh, this is definitely this is definitely for me. So applied and didn't think too much of it. I thought, oh, the chances of getting these things are so low. And then a couple of months later, I got the email that, hey, you're one of the recipients. And so that involved being in a cohort of, I think it was 100 entrepreneurs, all in the creative small business space. And it was an 8-week boot camp, for all of the basics, which is something that I needed. I'd been around business, I'd done operations within a business. But again, kind of business planning, finances, marketing. I'd only ever done, organic marketing. Thinking anything about paid was like, so scary. Felt like I couldn't do that. And yeah, even, finance and accounting was something that someone else had always done. I knew a little bit about it, had never gotten hands-on with anything. So to get walked through, in these kind of sections, and it was really up to me to keep myself to it. I know some other people who participated didn't take as much from it because I thought, I can't really put my time into this. I'm running my business, right? But for me,
Right.
I was like, this is one of the most important things I can do is like go through every worksheet and do every exercise and produce every deliverable. So I really held myself to that. I thought, well, this is, the grant, the $5,000, award for that. That's going to help my business. But for me, the greatest thing is that like, I'm going to really put my time and energy into this. I'm going to do everything. And it did help me feel much more grounded in, what I was doing and where I wanted to go and my ability to, keep my books and the confidence to go out and invest a bit, in some paid advertising to experiment and, let those timelines run a little bit. It's easy to get freaked out, you spend
Yeah.
20, 50, $100 in a day and you go, oh my God, I'm going to turn it off. You just get really scared. But to say, okay, well, I know this is the timeline. I know this is the amount based on my revenue and my expected revenue that I'm willing to invest. I'm going to like give it some time to play out and make my adjustments. I just never would have done those things. I would have felt too scared. Even if I'd researched, could I trust the things that I was reading or who I was researching from? So to be kind of led through by these experts and to have other people in the cohort, it really allowed me to feel like, okay, these are things that businesses do. I'm a business owner. I can do these things.
Right. Yeah, no, and again, going back to what you were saying earlier, there's no handbook for building a solo business, right? The type of
Mhm.
business we talked about. For again, to launch a startup, there are 100 different things you can rely on, resources you can go to, groups you can join, but
Yeah.
no roadmap for this kind of business. So yeah,
Yeah.
and you do have to learn to do everything, right? Even the things you don't love so much. I
Yep.
still miss like, oh, I wish I could. I'm like, I'll just call the accounting department to get that invoice sent out. Then I'm like,
Yep.
yeah,
Here I am.
yeah. Time to do it. So, so we talked about the fact that you had sort of a diverse background. You had different types of experiences. You were an educator, you were a translator, you were
Mhm.
tech operations executive, and now you're sort of doing craft based wellness. So, do you feel like those diverse experiences have helped you in your business, or are they ways they've sort of hindered? Can you talk a little bit about how that has worked and how
Yeah.
yeah.
For me, I view it as a positive, and I think of it as something that has helped me because, you know, the tasks that I have to do now are very diverse, and I'm comfortable learning new things and being in
Right.
different spaces because that's what I've always done. And so, I think in some ways, I'm sure people who kind of, pick one career path out of college and stick to it and excel at it and, have a lot of kind of stability and steadiness in that path, I'm sure there are great benefits and they get a lot out of that and see it as an advantage. Um, but for me, I place a very high priority on my experience of life and my interest in what I'm doing and my enjoyment in what I'm doing. And so for me, that has always meant changing things up every few years. And, I've lived and worked in China, and, that's what I did my schooling in. And then, I thought, okay, I have to do something with Chinese, but then I was, well, no, I can have that skill and actually I can come back and do other things. And it did come around, um, with my time in the National Guard. Actually, that did draw on my linguistic experience. And, I started as a teacher, and now, some of my most popular content and what's really helped me grow is, tutorials online. People love that. And they say, oh, you're such a great teacher. And I think, well, because I love teaching and I used to do that, And so for me, it all comes around and helps me in the end. And because I do place such a priority on my, you know, enjoyment and experience of life, I think, well, I'm sure I'm giving things up in, having this kind of swirly, twirly career in these ups and downs. But to me, I'm getting what I want out of it.
Yeah, and I think on this path, it probably, I would say it's an asset, right? And there
Mm-hmm.
may be some things we have to unlearn from the corporate when we break the corporate shackles in terms of, but those are more sort of operational, and like you said, we're not able to pick up the phone and call somebody to do something anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to do it ourselves. So I think in the grand scheme, though, I agree with you. I'm in the same boat.
Yeah.
Um, so if we were to meet again 5 years from now, Hannah, what would you want to have achieved?
Oh, so the 5-year question is a little tricky because what I really, really want to achieve is I would love to have a physical retail/studio space one day. When I'll be able to do that, I don't totally know. So that was part of my kind of rebranding to Room for Calm. Was I knew I had this dream of opening a space where I could sell products, but I could host events where people can come in and craft, have a space where people have access to supplies that maybe they don't have, but they can come use while they're visiting. Um, and have a variety of resources and events and a place that's a physical room for calm for people. That's my dream. And I thought, oh, by rebranding, I'm allowing myself space to achieve that. But actual place and where I'm located is important. And right now, the community that I'm living in, it doesn't feel the most promising for it. So I want to do that one day. I don't know if it'll be in 5 years. I definitely hope in 10. And I don't know exactly where that will mean I have landed.
Well, I'm rooting for you. I feel like every city should have one of those because we have them for kids, but we don't have them for adults. And I feel like we need them
Yes.
more for adults today than we do.
Yep. So that's the dream. We'll see. We'll see if I can do it.
I love it. So, if you were to offer one piece of advice to somebody wanting to start this solopreneur journey, what would you tell them?
I would say give it a shot in a low risk way, right? Don't stop doing what you're doing, but just think, what would I love to do? And just go do a little of it, right? I started just with the Etsy shop. I had actually had one before that. It was cross stitch based, but it was, kind of custom garments. Total failure. I mean, not a single sale. I realized how hard that was for an online thing. It was a bad idea, but I learned from it. And then, like a couple years later, I thought, okay, I still really want to do something like this. And I tried it again and it picked up. And so I would say just go try and do the thing. Do it in a way that costs almost no money and maybe none at all. And that just takes the amount of time that you have to give to it and give it a shot and just see if you feel like that spark, you get that sense of promise, or if it's like, oh man, yeah, this one is not it because I've been through that too. And that's
Right.
fine. And, go from there. But don't be afraid to just try it in whatever low effort way. You don't have to go all in all at once.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you're right. You need to enjoy it, right? Because you're going to be working harder than you've ever worked in any corporation. I always tell people that they're surprised when I say that. But so
It's
you
true.
really should enjoy it, right? Because if you're waking up on Saturday dreading Sunday, which is also a work day for me right now, then it's going to be a problem. And actually, I
Yeah.
had a guest on episode 26, and I loved the phrase that he used, Adam. He called it "too small to fail." Right. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the way we need to think of ourselves in terms of, so I love the way you describe that.
Yeah.
So is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners that we haven't covered?
I don't think so. That was a pretty good, wide ranging conversation.
Yeah, I agree. It was absolutely great. So that brings us to our rapid fire round. So I'm
Okay.
just going to throw 5 questions at you and tell us whatever comes to your mind. So what is the weirdest or most unexpected thing you've ever cross-stitched?
Oh, that is an interesting question. Well, I made something that is not available anywhere in my shop, but if anyone knows Molong, the little kind of Japanese cute character, I made a little pride Molong with a pride flag last year to celebrate Pride Month, and I loved that, and it was just kind of there and then gone.
That's great. What's a craft supply you can't live without?
Oh, embroidery thread. I have
Oh,
so much. It's just the best to hold and touch and hang and all that.
I can see it. It lights up your face when you
Oh,
talk about
yeah.
it. What's one thing your past self wouldn't believe about your life right now?
Oh, I think back to what I said before, I would not believe that I own my own business. I just never thought that was in the cards for me or anything I would remotely be interested in. Never would have thought it.
Yeah, and you can see where your past self should see you now. Um, if your entrepreneurial journey was a cross stitch pattern, what would the design be?
Maybe so. I do a lot of, snarky designs. I'll pick from something that I actually have, but it's one that says, let me say this about that. Nope. That's been a very important thing for me to stay focused, not say yes to everything, and also not really worry too much about what other people are saying or what's coming in from the outside. Stay true to myself, stay focused in my journey.
Yeah, let it just roll off, right? And that's a good thing
Mhm.
to. And again, it's a lesson that it's taken me a little while to learn, not to take things personally. So I love that.
Mhm.
So last question: if Room for Calm had a mascot, what would it be?
It would be this rooster that's
Ah,
behind me right here because I don't know. I found it at a yard sale or something, but it's been sitting in my workspace as like a little mascot for quite a while. It's got nothing to do with the business, but it just watches over my shoulder as I work. And I think that would have to be my mascot.
I love it. Yeah, I think it's a great mascot. Well, that's a fun way to end our show, Hannah. So thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and talking about your journey. I really appreciate it. And I think our listeners will really enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you so much. You made it very relaxing and easy.
Hannah's story isn't about chasing 7 figure growth or going viral. It's a quiet rebellion against the hustle script. When her old plan fell apart, she didn't chase a new ladder. She paused, reimagined success, and chose calm, creative, intentional solopreneurship on her terms. Here are my key takeaways. Let go of the someday script. Hannah's career coach asked the game changing question: instead of waiting 15 years to do what you love, what if you could do it now? Too many solopreneurs defer joy, waiting for a mythical number in the bank or a safer time. But freedom isn't a future milestone. It's a daily choice to build the life you actually want now. Growth isn't always more, sometimes it's wider. Hannah's evolution from cubicle cross stitches to room for calm wasn't about abandoning a niche. It was about creating space for a deeper mission to unfold. If your niche feels too narrow to grow with you, don't assume you have to start over. It might be time to reframe your mission, not abandon it. Sometimes the biggest growth comes when you zoom out, so the business can grow with you. Energy management over time management. By tuning into her natural rhythms rather than arbitrary hours, Hannah discovered her best physical work happens in cool mornings while afternoon energy suits computer tasks. This isn't just productivity, it's self awareness as a strategy. Your circadian rhythm is your competitive advantage. Stop forcing yourself into arbitrary schedules and start designing your days around when you naturally perform best. The grow, refine, maintain framework. Instead of obsessing over productivity porn or tracking every minute, Hannah measured where her time was going. Am I growing, refining, or maintaining? That clarity helped her avoid the perfectionist trap. Now, you can endlessly tweak your website, your logo, your content, but if none of it moves the needle on your business, it's just procrastination with polish. Creative time isn't a luxury, it's a tool. Hannah reminded me that working with our hands isn't indulgent, it's essential. It grounds us, regulates our nervous system, and gives us a sense of accomplishment that technology and screens never will. In a culture obsessed with optimizing every minute, making something tangible might just be the most radical thing you can do for your business and your sanity. Hannah's story proves that solopreneurship doesn't have to be built on hustle and hockey sticks to be real. Her story is proof that your business doesn't need to be loud to be powerful, and that the quiet solopreneurs, the ones building calm in a chaotic world, might just be the ones we need most right now. Thanks for listening to Unfiltered Solopreneur. If you got value from today's episode, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with another solopreneur who needs this message. Until next time, keep breaking free from the corporate grind, and remember, your story is your most powerful asset. Live solo or die corporate.